the Destroyer of the Universe, Rin Itoshi, versus the Blue Rose of Armageddon, Michael Kaiser, versus the Demon King Isagi Yoichi. A matchup for the ages, the best of the best, baby, as these three, in addition to Baru, are the dominators of the Neo-Egoist League, and with them recently having their battle set in stone, it has never been more fitting for us to introduce the first triple threat matchup on my channel, where we are going to look at their stats, abilities, and explore their best feats to determine who is the overall better player and the true dominator of the Neo-Egoist League. Isagi Yoichi, the protagonist of our story and the Tetris of BLUELOCK, a guy who literally built himself brick by brick from zero to hero, with weapons and abilities that don't seem that impressive on their own, but when put together they result in one of the most menacing, one of the most dangerous U20 players. And in fact, this ability to build his place in of itself is a weapon of his and probably his strongest. However, and as always, first we gotta talk about his physicality, which I gotta say, Isagi is the definition of average when it comes to his physical stats. Nothing really about his physicality is worth noting, with the exception of course to his insane endurance, which skyrocketed after the Manshine City game, where he trained and increased it insanely, and that was to enable himself to use metavision for the entirety of the game. But just keep in mind that other than his endurance, Isagi's thing is that him being very average when it comes to physicality. However, and since we spoke about his metavision, this ocular ability in addition to his brain nullify this weakness completely, especially at his high level, and the perfect example of this was in chapter 293, where he beats both Shidou and Kaiser to the ball, even though they had the physical advantage. However, talking about metavision leads us straight to talk about his abilities and weapons, which is specifically where Isagi shines. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the real stuff. Now, as I said, Isagi is a character who built himself brick by brick, ability by ability, and so it is only natural and it is only fitting that the first weapon we should talk about is the one that put everything together. Of course, I'm talking about his adaptability, his ability to analyze and then to devour allies and enemies alike, to morph and to improve with each play he witnesses, is an ability that is honestly just busted. It essentially allows him to catch up to almost everyone given enough time, and as we have seen, he was even trying to adapt to world-class players. And to be honest, this kinda makes Isagi somewhat unbeatable, especially after achieving this high level at the end of the PXG game, which again he did due to his adaptability. And in reality, it doesn't just end with this, as his adaptability kinda makes him the most versatile player in BLUELOCK, and as I have said many times before, it kinda makes him like Snuffy, because now he most likely can develop a playing design to whatever situation he finds himself in. And again, all of this is thanks to his ultimate weapon, which is his adaptability, which puts everything together and is often exemplified with a jigsaw-like effect, where Isagi falls into pieces, then reconstruct himself having taken the new pieces into consideration. And so, let's talk about what these pieces are. Now, since we spoke about this new level he achieved, the first piece I want to talk about is actually egocentrism, which is Isagi's ability to understand the motives and the reasoning behind the plays of other players on the field, whether be it his enemies or even allies, like we've seen him do with Yuki and recently with Ness. Now, the reason I chose egocentrism first, because when Isagi rids himself of all secondary thoughts and all emotions, he becomes much better at reading players, as right now his judgment is not clouded by anything, and Isagi sees things just like the way they are. And if you think about it, when this is coupled with his adaptability, it becomes even scarier, as now since he can understand clearly what his opponents or allies are doing or thinking, he can much easier adapt to them. Now, all of this on its own is actually rather scary and rather impressive. However, and if you could believe it, he even elevated this ability another level by forcing himself to be the fastest when it comes to thinking. Since he rid himself of any emotional impulse, Isagi now can think and predict things faster than anyone. Even a player like Shidou, who does everything instinctively, is left in the dust when it comes to reacting to plays, simply because while Shidou waits for the play to happen before reacting, Isagi reacts even before the play is conceived, and this honestly gave him such an edge and completely nullified his speed weakness, as now he will always have an edge over any player on the field, simply because he moves before them all. Now these two weapons, his adaptability and egocentrism, even though they are broken and alone are world-class worthy, there is a weapon that quite literally makes them go to a higher dimension. Of course, I'm talking about Metavision, probably the best overall vision and the third strongest weapon in BLUELOCK after adaptability and the chameleon style. And for those who've been living under a rock, Metavision is an ocular ability, where the player utilizes his peripheral vision to intake every information around him. This quite literally gives the player a bird's eye view, where he can see everything that is happening within a set radius. And fun fact, this was the weapon that differentiated Isagi, who had no answer to the NEL level, to an Isagi who was able to dominate it completely. But think about it, with Metavision, since he has almost every player in his field of vision, and through egocentrism he can understand them all, and then through his adaptability he can adapt and counter them all, making him probably the player who can capitalize the most on any given situation, and honestly just a broken character altogether. Now, if you could believe it, that's not all, as I am yet to talk about one of his signature weapons, which are his off-the-ball movements. With everything being in his vision, and with him understanding the motives of the defenders, this rather simple weapon shines like a beacon because it grants him the ability to escape almost everyone, even though he doesn't have the speed, even though he doesn't have the physicality. By being this slippery and by being this hard to keep in check, Isagi can snatch almost any pass coming his way through his footwork, and this weapon specifically nullifies his low strength stats, as he doesn't need to win one-on-one with the ball, rather he can defeat players off the ball and find himself completely free in the penalty box, where he can easily score. This weapon also benefited from Isagi having one of the best metavision, because as you all know, once you master metavision to a certain degree, it grants you a special weapon, a weapon that we've seen first from Shidou and Sai. I'm talking of course about the no interval plays. You see, again, because everything is in his field of vision, and because he has no emotions and because he understands everyone, Isagi doesn't waste any motion in his plays. Each off-the-ball movement serves a purpose of getting him free and giving him a high chance of scoring. And honestly, when he achieved this high level in PXG, and then when he added the fastest piece, Isagi quite literally became near damn impossible to stop. Even when he had probably the best player at Duel and Rin on him constantly, he still found a way to free himself and to score. However, I keep talking about this new level he attained at the end of the PXG game, yet I did not explain it at all. You see, as I stated when talking about his adaptability, Isagi now is emotionless, and there is only one thing on his mind: winning and beating literally everyone. An elevated state that I like to call the architect, because Isagi is quite literally building beautiful attacks from nothing. Now think of this state as if Isagi just attained Super Saiyan 2, simply because this is just an ascended state of metavision, egocentrism and his adaptability. You see, I consider Isagi post metavision as a Super Saiyan form to his previous one, and so this new elevated state really resembles Super Saiyan 2. Furthermore, in this elevated state, Isagi exposes everyone's ego through selling his soul. In a sense, if the right opportunity comes, Isagi has no issue sacrificing himself for the logical and the most rational play, and depending on how the other players react, he can better understand their egos and their motives, and hence the term expose their egos. But finally, we reach the weapon that wraps everything Isagi has together, which is of course his shooting ability. His direct shot, a very powerful and rather effective shot, but one that requires him to be completely free. And you might think that this shooting ability on its own is kind of a hindrance, but actually it fits perfectly with all of his weapons, as through metavision and no interval plays, Isagi can shoot immediately upon receiving the ball, and this is accentuated with him being very slippery, as soon as Isagi finds a small space he can run there, and as soon as the ball comes he can shoot immediately, not giving the defender any time to react. However, and because he is the adaptability demon, that's not all. You see, to make this shot even more scary, Isagi trained on how to do it with both legs. And even though his left shot is only 40% as powerful, the fact that he can most likely escape everyone is more than enough for him to score with a 40% shot. And finally, the weapon that he attained in the PXG game, that makes his direct shot near impossible to read one-on-one. Of course, I'm talking about his double gun volley. Now, think about it this way. Since Isagi can use both legs, he also can feint with both. So if Isagi can't get completely free and a defender is able to close on him, he actually has 3 options: shoot, ball control and then shoot with the other leg, or finally feint then shoot. And I know this doesn't make his shot the best by any means, it honestly makes it very versatile. And as I said, the weapon that beautifully wraps his abilities by being the point of the spear to his playing style, which honestly, due to it being made up of varying weapons that each complement each other, it results in Isagi being one of the most versatile, one of the most menacing players in the field. However, can he beat the Emperor? And can he beat the Beast of Destruction? Michael Kaiser, the German Emperor, the new Gen 11 striker, and probably one of the most hyped character in the U20 category after Sai, the one player that the fans went crazy over, waiting to see what he can do, and honestly, the hype was well deserved. Unlike Isagi, Kaiser packs few abilities and weapons that honestly are just broken, but let's not get ahead of ourselves because first we gotta talk about his physicality. First of all, Kaiser isn't really that strong of a player. His draw strength and power is pretty average, I would say. However, his other 3 stats are honestly just broken, as Kaiser is a speed demon. In this game, the PXG game, after Awakening and after Rebellion, he was able to outplay both Isagi and Hiyori just because he was that much faster. Even though they had the same vision, Kaiser's speed really gave him an edge. However, it's not all. His endurance is also through the roof, and to be honest, it is a prerequisite to his playing style, mostly because of his meta vision, but also due to his speed that we spoke of. And finally, his jumping ability. Now, he can jump, but it's not about how high he can do it, but rather what he can do in midair. You see, the guy can literally spin midair no problem and shoot or clear the ball while being in the air. And this ability was at full display in his bicycle goal and then when he cleared the ball from Ren. However, enough about his physicality. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move to the important stuff. Let's move to his abilities and weapons. As I said, Kaiser packs just few weapons, but enough to take him to the highest of ranks in the U20 category. And it makes sense when we look at his ego, since he is the restrictive type. Unlike for example Isagi and Hiyori, Kaiser doesn't need to be open-ended. In fact, he can perform better under restriction, and this kinda makes it a prerequisite that his weapons are very effective, otherwise they really wouldn't serve any purpose. So, and speaking of effectiveness, let's talk about the weapon that is his and only his. I'm talking about the Kaiser Impact, which is honestly the best shot, and seeing that the Kaiser Impact is this insane of a weapon, it's only natural that all of his skills revolve around this broken shooting ability, which is not an overstatement if I call it the unstoppable force, unless of course your name is Charles or Lorenzo. But in any case, the first weapon that enables him to tap into the unstoppable force is his off-the-ball movements, which enables Kaiser to get rid of the defenders very easily so he can shoot. And because he has the best shot, he has a very high chance at scoring. And much like Isagi, his off-the-ball movements are practically the best in the U20 category right now. And I mean, when I say this, it shouldn't be any surprise that he also presents meta vision, which is the weapon that helps him find the perfect position from where he can shoot. And to be honest, at first I've always felt as if his meta vision was limited. I mean, especially after we saw Isagi and Hiyori and how far they can take it. And I've always speculated that it was because of a secondary ocular ability that he possesses, which is the Predator Eyes. However, it was not the case. It was simply due to his arrogance and due to his ego, which he shed completely when he awakened in the PXG game, giving him instantly one of the best meta visions ever, a meta vision that I can only say is second to Snuffy and probably Charles. But, and despite it being so OP, as I said, meta vision is not the only ocular ability that Kaiser has. Enter the Predator Eyes. Now, these eyes are very different from meta vision, and in reality they are the only ones that can rival it. You see, the Predator Eyes fall into different categories. First, ones that enable the player to translate shots into goals, and this is divided into two: the goal course hunting ability that we've seen from Kaiser and Baro, and the goalkeeper hunting ability that we've seen from Ren and Baro again. Then there is a secondary path to the Predator Eyes which we've seen from Ren, which is the ability of the player to hunt for the best course utilized by the enemy and completely counter it. Now granted, we did not see this ability to Kaiser's Predator Eyes, or even the goalkeeper hunting ability we did not see neither, and that's probably again due to the Kaiser impact. You see, Kaiser is more interested in targeting narrow spaces from where he can force his ball, and for that, he only needs the goal course hunting ability, as most of the times goalkeepers can't even react to his Kaiser impact, and so in reality stopping it is near impossible once Kaiser finds the course, and hence he only needs that path of evolution to the Predator Eyes. Now, as I said, in the PXG game, Kaiser shed his weakness and improved, and attained a new level. There is much like Isagi devoid of emotion, where Kaiser is only focused on scoring. And honestly, this was a beautiful awakening, from an arrogant player who thinks he knows all, to a player who is only focused on winning. However, unlike Isagi who employs adaptability, Kaiser on the other hand, when awakened, he unlocked the weapon that counters adaptability, which is his unpredictability. You see, Kaiser now all on his own kinda became a menace on the field. No one can really expect what he is going to do, and no one can even grasp what he is thinking. Not even his opponents today, Isagi and Rin. And if you think about it, if you couple unpredictability with the Kaiser impact in his off-the-ball movements, Kaiser kinda becomes a ticking bomb. You know it's deep in your mind that if you make one mistake, Kaiser will punish you dearly, as was the case in the PXG game. However, in that time when he scored, he introduced a new weapon, which is not a weapon that I would say stand on its own, but rather it is an extension to his Kaiser impact, which is the Magnus shooting technique. You see, the Kaiser impact, despite being deadly, has a very predictable course, and while Kaiser compensates for this with his Predator Eyes, the fact of the matter that players can predict what he is doing, like we've seen Lorenzo and Charles do, and for that reason specifically, Kaiser evolved his shot, and now he can curve it where it seems that it is going outside only for it to turn in the last moment and take everyone by surprise. And honestly, this kinda makes his shot very broken. You either cover the direct course to his shot, or you cover the wide space the Magnus technique will take. And we've seen that despite Rin and Charles both understanding Kaiser and what he was about to do, they both covered the direct course, and Kaiser took them on a ride with his Magnus technique. And it's not just Charles or Rin, he even was able to trick the goalkeeper and Isagi at the same time. And as you all know, had it not been for Loki being that broken of a player, he would ended their game then and there in that foul kick. Overall, I'd say Kaiser is a player who delivered in the hype we put on him, with weapons and abilities that are focused on making him the deadly striker that he is. But can he be the Destroyer Rin? And can he be the Demon King? Rin Itoshi, the Sasuke of BLUELOCK. Ever since his introduction, Rin was him. Rin was that guy, dominating BLUELOCK pretty much ever since its inception. Rin is the definition of a genius, as he has an innate talent for football ever since he was a kid, and he is the final boss of BLUELOCK and the master of utilizing abilities before they get properly introduced. However, first, let's talk about his physicality. Rin possesses one of the best physicalities ever, as he is a well-rounded player with a great complete physicality. He doesn't dominate any field per se, but he is a master of all traits. You see, he has great power, great jumping ability, amazing speed, and of course insane durability and endurance. However, if you thought this is impressive, well, Rin actually shines with his abilities and weapons. In fact, he is so good at utilizing his abilities, he is a player that we've seen him use certain moves that weren't even properly introduced at that point, and actually this always gets me. For example, even before Ego explained luck to the BLUELOCKers, Rin was able to utilize it, and in fact he beat Isagi because of that. But that's not actually all. You see, he was the player to introduce the idea of utilizing the eyes to look for opportunities, whether on defense or on offense. Furthermore, we can even get to specifics. As you all know, Rin recently unlocked the Predator Eyes when he utilized these eyes to stop the connection between Kaiser and Isagi. However, if you could believe it, that was not the first time we've seen the Predator Eyes from Rin, as in the third selection when he was pressed by Otoya, he hit his shot behind Shidou and CHIGIRI, completely taking the goalkeeper by surprise. And as you all know, this is definitely the goalkeeper hunting ability, which means my speculation of him presenting the Predator Eyes was completely correct. However, that's not the only speculation I have regarding Rin. You see, the way he plays, the way he controlled everyone before the U20 game, really is a testament to him possessing metavision. as when Isagi unlocked Metavision, Hiyori stated that he now is starting to play like Rin, and that's almost like a confirmation for him possessing Metavision, even though he did not awaken it yet. However, that's not all. You see, in the U20 game, when trying to stop Sai, we've seen the grid associated with Metavision not only once, but actually twice, almost confirming that he too have Metavision, albeit a crude and unpolished version of it. But also in the PXG game, we've seen that him and Karasu were the only players without Metavision to react to Metavision players, and Karasu later was confirmed to have Metavision, and so it is only natural to assume that Rin might have it too, and this kinda makes him scary. If he is able to play at this high level with this insane performance, what will happen when Rin fully awakens his Metavision? Well, that's a question that will be answered in the U20 World Cups. But regardless of Metavision, Rin still possesses one of the best off-the-ball movements, and surprisingly he also plays with no intervals at all, which honestly is such a feat for someone who is yet to unlock Metavision. Then there is the fact that he presents a form of egocentrism. You see, since the beginning of BLUELOCK, Rin was that guy to manipulate his teammates and his opponents for his own benefits, like we've seen him do with Arya and Batra in the second selection, but more recently like we've seen him do in the PXG game. You see, Rin was able to easily understand the motives of Isagi and Kaiser and counter it completely in chapter 289, indicating that he too has a level of egocentrism, or at least an understanding of how players think and how players would act. And much like Isagi, we've seen him even use egocentrism offensively, and fun fact, he used it against Isagi, by ignoring him completely and going to crash with Kaiser. And here I gotta say, his egocentrism really reached a new height when Rin was engulfed in the Berserker state. And so I think it's time that we talk about his strongest weapon, which is very weird because it's not really a weapon or an ability, but rather a state. A state where Rin unleashes his full potential. There, Rin gains the Destroyer Eye, which is obviously a made-up name, but I think is an ocular ability that allows Rin to analyze his opponents, understand their strongest and weakest points, and then he employs his superior physicality and his techniques to utilize those weakness points against the player and completely destroying him, like we've seen him do in the U20 game, or recently when he scored his goal. However, if you think about it, this ability to destroy any player one-on-one kinda gives Rin one of the best, if not the best dribbling ability, where immediately it is more oppressive than other dribbling abilities simply because it falls under the umbrella of passive dribbling, which is a form of dribbling where the player reacts to his opponent's moves and completely counter them. And Rin actually takes this concept to the extreme. Simply put, because instead of just countering, Rin actually employs destruction, which is more volatile and even more effective against their mental state, as this could straight up destroy the morale of the opposing team, like we've seen it happen in the PXG game. And honestly, if it was just his ability to counter and destroy the opponent, it wouldn't be that impressive, and I wouldn't call him the one-on-one emperor. You see, because Rin in the Berserker state introduces another weapon, which we actually spoke of before. I'm talking about unpredictability. You see, unlike Baro and Kaiser's unpredictability, which is very rational, Rin's unpredictability on the other hand is completely irrational. And because of his superior talent and because of his superior physicality, Rin can force goals that otherwise would be near impossible, which honestly makes him such an absurd player, simply because you can't really choke him, since he will simply go beyond what you're plotting. However, this unpredictability of his, because it is irrational, it comes at a very steep price, which is his volatility. You see, his unpredictability doesn't just hurt his opponents, it also hurts his teammates. And I think the biggest example of this is Rin not wanting to score unless it's a beautiful goal. Bastard Munich already had the lead, and one goal could have ended it. Him choosing not to shoot and him choosing to rebuild the attack was such a risky move that the slightest of mistakes could have ended the game then and there. I honestly think this is one of the nastiest weaknesses ever, and it's not just me who thinks that. Even the best player in the world, Noah, commented on how ugly Rin's ego is in the Destroyer mode. The fact that he didn't score a guaranteed goal, even though his team was behind, really shows how severe of a weakness this is. However, that's not all. You see, Rin in the Destroyer mode also becomes very physical and very volatile. And funny enough, this was exploited multiple times by Egagori and then by Kaiser and Isagi, especially by Kaiser, who completely countered Rin's play. And this volatility coupled with his nasty ego really hurts Rin as an overall player, despite him being probably the best one-on-one player in the U20 category, and maybe only rivaled by Lorenzo. and I think him costing PXG the game at the end really is the biggest example I could give you. However, Rin is still the best one-on-one player, and Rin is still such a scary and a dominant player that the label the final boss of BLUELOCK is really fitting. However, can he be the Emperor? Or can he beat the adaptability demon? Kaiser vs Isagi vs Rin, a matchup written in the stars. And usually I take my sweet time talking about who would win. However, for this one, I'm not going to bore you guys. I'm not going to talk about their physical battles, which Rin wins easily. And I'm not going to bore you with any random discussion. In fact, I am just going to get right into it. When it comes to who is the most dominant player individually, I think Rin completely dominates both Kaiser and Isagi. In fact, I don't think or say that. We've seen it happen in the PXG game, where Isagi and Kaiser needed to unite in order to win against Rin. However, as you all know, being the best one-on-one player doesn't mean anything if you can't translate that into being the best overall player. You see, his volatility and his nasty ego really makes him kinda risky for any team he plays for, and thus I think this alone really hurts his overall points. However, that's not all. You see, after the final play, I officially hate Rin. Rin is officially the main character I hate the most in the whole show, simply because he cost PXG the game now 2 times. First, when he was completely childish and refused to pass to Shidou in order to end the game. There, Kaiser's unpredictability took him on a ride, and in fact the counter-attack resulted in the goal, which leads me to the second time he cost PXG. You see, even though he saw that Shidou is on Kaiser, because Ness got the ball, he chose to cover Kaiser as well, despite him knowing that Isagi might capitalize on this, and despite him knowing of Isagi's ability to get behind. Rin, in such a bad move, chose Kaiser despite the latter being covered by Shidou. And for that reason, I'm going to say this. When it comes to the overall assessment, I think it's not even a triple threat match, because Rin is so far behind Kaiser and Isagi, whom I think the matchup should continue between. As I said, Rin is really falling behind in the overall assessment, especially due to his nasty mentality. And so, who would win between Kaiser and Isagi? Now, in the PXG game, they kinda became the same if you think about it. They both shed their weaknesses, they both shed their emotions, and now they both are thinking of only winning this game. They even dropped their childish rivalry and decided to work together in order for them to achieve the win. And they even let luck decide who gets to score the final goal, which honestly is something I did not expect. However, it really proves how mature they are. As for who would win between Kaiser and Isagi, as I said, I think they are the same. However, I think Isagi is slightly better, and that's completely due to his adaptability. Even if you think that Kaiser is slightly better than him, or he is on his level, I think Isagi's adaptability will close the gap and even enabling him to surpass Kaiser very shortly. So here are the final results. I would say Isagi and Kaiser are on the same level, however Rin is behind them, and since I take the overall assessment in my matchups, Rin will be the official loser today. As for Isagi and Kaiser, as I said, they are on the same level, however Isagi is slightly better, and thus he will be walking with the W today. Now if you think Kaiser is slightly better than Isagi, well, I would not really disagree, because honestly they are very close to each other, but if there is one thing I trust the most, that's adaptability. However, that's all I've got for you today guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.